Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Virtually 2024, Nomensa's free virtual web accessibility and digital inclusion conference. Huge thanks again to Ronnie for his fantastic talk earlier on this morning. We hope those that tuned in enjoyed it and found it valuable. Up next, we have the brilliant Elaine KA, Senior Accessibility Program Manager at Amazon Devices, with her talk, Disability Inclusive Marketing, What's the Playbook? In this talk, Elaine will discuss best practices for disability inclusive marketing, review lessons learned from Amazon's accessibility campaigns, and share how to put together a playbook to help you, your team, and your organization design accessibility-centric campaigns or any content that includes people with disabilities. We are joined again by MyClearText, who are providing live captions. You can access these by clicking on the closed caption button at the bottom of Zoom, or alternatively, I will drop a stream text link in the chat for a fully adjustable page of captions. As always, do get involved in the chat. Do let us know where you're tuned in from. Just make sure your settings are switched to everyone and not panelists and hosts. Also, please do submit any questions you have for Elaine using the Q&A function, and I'll get through as many as I can at the end. As always, this session is recorded and we'll send out the videos of all this week's talks as soon as they're ready shortly after the event. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Elaine, to kick things off.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Henry, and the Nomensa team for inviting Amazon and myself to share a little bit about what we've been working on. So today, as Henry mentioned, I'm going to be presenting on a marketing playbook. And rather than sharing Amazon's playbook with you, we thought, what about we show you what's the best way to develop your own playbook and adapt it for your organization or your company. Really more long-term and sustainable, in my opinion. So as Henry mentioned, my name is Elaine. Last name is just KA. You can find me on LinkedIn. I've been at Amazon for almost 2 years. Been in the disability and accessibility space for close to 7 years, I would say. I've really enjoyed it so far. My background is in marketing and communications, layered with accessibility and disability. Just like everybody, well, most of the people in the world, I'm connected to someone with a disability. I have non-apparent disability myself, so I feel very passionate about this topic. All right, so let me just adjust my, there we go. So I'll be talking for about an hour. I hope I don't get boring on you, but by the end of this session, you will, first and foremost, understand the importance of disability inclusion in marketing. Sometimes when you talk to marketing and communications professionals, they don't really see the intersection, and it's hugely important, not only for accessibility, but also for disability representation. I'm going to go through the key elements of a disability inclusive marketing playbook, and then outline how accessibility and disability inclusive marketing relates to different teams. As you probably know, working in the disability inclusion field requires a lot of advocacy, and the same holds true if you're in a marketing and communications function. There's always going to be advocacy, raising awareness, educating teams and stakeholders. So these are kind of cheat sheets to help you relate that to other stakeholders. And finally, get tools to know where to start. Okay. So long agenda today. First, do a little intro, who and why do you need a playbook? Who needs it? If you're here, you probably have a little bit of a hint on that. Getting started, what you need. We're going to get into a little bit of core values. This is important in this line of work. I'm not talking about your personal core values, but more about key tenets to keep in mind when you are working in this intersection. Then we'll dive into the meat of the content, getting into storytelling and representation best practices, getting into production best practices that includes pre-production, on-set, and post-production. run through some examples that Amazon has been working on and has released, do a little recap, share some resources, and then have the Q&A at the end. So a few notes before we begin. This is very much a starting point. Even though I'll be talking for a full hour, this is very much a starting point. I could absolutely go into one different section of this presentation by itself for an entirely new session. So with that in mind, you know, no matter where you're starting, it's important to be mindful and respectful about this topic, especially when we're talking about accessibility and disability. This is a starting point. Please dive deeper on your own. The language and representation best practices that I'll go over is currently what is true for today. But what holds true for today may change for tomorrow, next week, next year. So please keep that in mind, that the space is ever evolving, especially as the community's needs grow and change. And then finally, you know, always exercise good judgment and thoughtfulness. So why do you need a playbook? So at Amazon, we have this thing called leadership principles. It's a whole slew of them, about 16 of them, and one of them is customer obsession. And we really pride ourselves on being customer obsessed, and it's a good, no matter if you're at Amazon or not, it's a good practice in order to keep your customer at your line of sight always. So when your customers can see themselves in the content you create, they really feel like they're represented, and they feel like they're included in your campaigns and in your intentions. So this is kind of, and I'll get into it, marketing 101. Also, when the data also says it. So recent studies shown that 73% of people without disabilities said it was important that companies are inclusive of people with disabilities in their efforts, communications, advertising, and marketing. And then when you talk to people with disabilities, that number rose to 83% for both caregivers and people with disabilities. So not only is it important for your customer base that are without disabilities, is hugely important for those with disabilities and their caregivers. And as you may know, in the United States, as many as 1 in 4 Americans have a disability, and across the world, it's 1 billion people. So very important. Like I mentioned, you're not doing good marketing if you're missing a large portion of your audience. I just said 1 in 4. You're probably not. I don't know where most folks are tuning in from, but I'm on the East Coast. It's a little bit before, it's just after 8 o'clock in the morning. But no matter if you're in the United States and you risk missing a quarter of your audience, because I said 1 in 4, or if you're in other parts of the world that have similar demographic representation, if you're not including people with disabilities, you are missing a good portion of your target audience. And, you know, marketing is all about reaching your target audience. And, you know, when we talk about the disability community, we're talking about decades and decades of marginalization. And so when we do this type of work, we owe it to the underrepresented communities to get it right. When we try to do this and we do it the wrong way, or we miss the mark, such as using tokenism and tropes, it's actually harmful to the disability community. So I'll go into tropes later on, but it's really a big responsibility. So now that I've gone through the why, who needs the playbook? So I would say any organization or company that advertises, that uses marketing communications. So that's almost every company and organization. But specifically when we're talking about roles, we're talking about creatives. That means people related to video, still, animation, direction. That's my dog. Storytelling. So, you know, when you think about which roles exercise storytelling, that's many. Public relations, marketing, communications, even executive communications. When you're talking about perhaps a senior leader that wants to post, that wants to write an internal message communication to your organization. That is written communication storytelling. And if it has anything to do with disability, this playbook is going to be relevant. And then production. This is kind of always an afterthought, but production is very much related to this. How do you cast inclusively? How do you creatively direct inclusively? Ensure your set design is accessible, provide accommodations, things like that. Okay, so let's get into what goes into the playbook. So if you're starting to make the playbook for your organization, which will then serve as the backbone for all of the efforts across many teams, these are kind of key elements that we recommend in putting into your playbook. First, a glossary. This seems very simple, but actually language and terminology is the first place that people stop in their tracks. Oftentimes, many teams or individuals or even leadership are afraid to get into this line of work because they're not sure of which terminology to use. For example, do we say disability? And for the longest time, at least in the United States, there still is, many euphemisms like differently abled, special needs, ability something, I don't know. Sometimes they morph into things and I'm like, where did this land? But having a glossary that just says, hey, just use the word disability. It's not a bad word. That will help set the tone and get things kicked off in the right direction. And so once everybody knows what terms to use, what's okay, what's not okay to say, then you can get into the actual work. Then some of these things I'll get into right now, the branding strategy, what relates to your brand. Of course, as you develop a playbook, and I'm sharing with you what goes into the playbook, in no way does this need to strive differently from your own brand tenets. So, for example, Amazon prides itself on being a very peculiar brand. We're a little quirky. And when we talk about accessibility and disability inclusion and the examples that I'll show you with you today, we still have that little quirkiness in there because it relates to the parent brand. So this playbook should really ladder up to your larger organizational tenets. Speaking of tenets, I'll talk about core values or tenets or principles, whatever you may want to call them. Then representation best practices, production best practices, as I mentioned, pre-production, on-set, and post-production. Content accessibility guidelines, that is very important, especially if you have like a cheat sheet that you can give to producers and say, okay, when you produce a video, make sure you have captions, audio description, etc. These little guidelines would be great to include in the playbook and the resources. How did we develop our playbook? So I'm within Amazon devices specifically. So that means Fire Tablet, Kindle, Echo, all of the Alexa devices. And when we look to develop our own playbook, we did this both on quantitative and qualitative data. Amazon is very much a data-driven company. To do anything, we have to base it on data and evidence. So some of this included results and insights from our accessibility campaign from late 2022, which I'll share a little snippet of. We produced, I think, about 12 vignettes and one large accessibility anthem. We also released Amazon Accessibility Hub, which you can access at amazon.com/accessibility. And we really gained a wealth of information. And so when we developed this playbook and the trials and errors and everything, we were able to put it all together and say, okay, this is the best way to do it moving forward. We also consulted with people with lived experiences of varied disabilities. So the reality is there are over 500 types of disabilities. And although I sit on a huge team of 2, There's no way we can understand the lived experience of everybody with a disability. Of course, we have our own lived experiences and it's very much intersectional, but how can we really be inclusive and pull in more people and more of their perspective to the table? When we want to create a campaign that is disability inclusive, we don't want it to be the stereotypical wheelchair user in a campaign. So how can we broaden that out into more disability representation? Well, that will require consulting with people with those lived experiences. So at Amazon, we have different mechanisms we can tap into. One of which you may have at your organization is an employee resource group. So an employee resource group is usually an affinity group, and they are organized by different affinities. So disability being one of them. And at Amazon, there is the Amazon People with Disabilities group. And it's so big. I mean, Amazon is a large company, but the number of people in that group is across the globe. There's also a leadership team, and really recommend building a strong relationship with your disability employee resource group and earning their trust, and being able to quickly gut check with things with them is hugely valuable. Now, I'm not saying rely on them to do your work or part of the work, because that is not part of their job. But it is good to consult with people with those lived experiences and just say like, hey, we're thinking about this. Is that right? Or are we missing the mark? And a quick gut check. I think that is really valuable. And then, last but not least, tapped into connections to the broader disability community. So not only do you want to connect with and earn the trust of the people with disabilities within your organization, but also more broadly. So make sure you're connected to disability advocates in the space, disability influencers, policymakers, other disability rights organizations, and really tap into what is it that they are, what is it that they're advocating for. As I mentioned, the needs will change every year. Some things have not changed, and that's why everybody is still advocating, but really tapping into that and having a pulse on what the community is saying will help you ground any campaigns to be not only relevant to the community, but also authentic and intentional. So I want to pause talking real quick and share with you, this is our Amazon Accessibility Anthem, is what we call it. And this is kind of, this has splices of the individual vignettes that I had mentioned. And we created an entire montage with all of those vignettes into what we call the anthem. And we tested this before, so the audio should work. So I'll go ahead and play the video. Second.
Quick cuts of Amazon customers with disabilities.
How do you become the Earth's most customer-centric company? By thinking about ways to serve all of your customers.
A man in a wheelchair accepts a package from an Amazon driver.
And since 1 in every 5 people has a disability, you'd want to make your products and services accessible.
A teen in a wheelchair reads a book on a Fire tablet using a Bluetooth switch.
You might start with small things that make a big difference. You could even invent things to make life a little easier.
A blind teen holding up a can in front of an Echo Show.
Alexa, what am I holding?
You'd make binge watching not just watchable, but listenable.
Boss arrives at the crime scene.
And you design your tablets and e-readers to be adaptable.
In a home office, a woman working at a computer uses a refreshable braille display.
Which would mean hiring experts who actually use these features. Oh, here's an idea.
Alexa, open the blinds.
Okay. You could make your products affordable. And if you accomplished all this, you'd be honest that there's still a lot more you could do for your customers, especially customers with disabilities.
In the home office, the woman now faces the camera. She's the narrator. Words appear. Jessie L., Senior Accessibility Specialist.
And then you get back to work.
Amazon.com/accessibility.
All right. Now let me see if I can go to the next slide without playing the video.
Quick cuts of Amazon.
There we go. So I hope you enjoyed that video. Like I said, it's actually a compilation of 12 videos in one. And I love the video, not just because my team produced it, but it also showcases and positions an employee with a disability as the narrator and the storyteller. And if you've been working in the disability space, you know that one of the main kind of mantras or maxims of the community is nothing about us without us. And we take that very much to heart. A way to do that is to consult with people with disabilities, but a better way to do that is to actually employ people with disabilities and have them at the table. So Jessie is my coworker. I work with her. We are on different projects together, and she's awesome. And when we were looking to produce this video, we were like, hey, let's tap on Jessie, and she was excited to do it. She was in the voice recording studio and everything. Of course, there are many other people with disabilities alongside Jessie that we could have tapped into. Not saying why we tapped onto her for one reason or another, but the point being, it's important to center the person with a disability in your story, not just talk about them. So let's get into the playbook. What do you need? So first and foremost in your playbook, start with your brand strategy. As I said, this is supposed to ladder up into your overarching brand tenets, principles, whatever you may call them. Part of this brand strategy is knowing your customer. Who are you talking to? This could be the general population, which includes people with disabilities. You may be targeting people with disabilities, so then you need to kind of peel back those layers. Is it all people with disabilities? Is it a certain cohort of people with disabilities? Really diving deep into who is your customer. Alongside that is having a position. What do you stand for and what do you offer? At Amazon Devices, it's very easy because we offer products. We offer devices, and we offer an accessible product. So we stand for designing and developing inclusively and releasing these amazing devices that have accessibility built in them. So take a look at your own organization and your own brand and figure out what is it that you stand for and what do you offer. We probably have different organizations, so it makes no sense to have the same position as Amazon. That's another reason why this session is about helping you develop your playbook rather than just saying, here's ours, go use the same. It wouldn't work. And then, alongside that is the identity, your brand identity. If you're unfamiliar with brand identity, it's kind of like, what is the difference between, and I had a good example about this before, Rice Krispies versus Corn Flakes. Rice Krispies has those little characters, snap, crackle, pop, and they're a little bit more quirky and fun. Corn Flakes is kind of like, get the job done, eat breakfast and move on with your day. So figure out what is your brand's personality traits. As I mentioned, we are a little bit more quirky and peculiar, so we integrated that into our campaign. Your brand may be forward-thinking, more empowering, more innovative. It could be anything, really. So make sure you outline that first and foremost so that your playbook supports that. And then look into your marketing goals. What do you hope to achieve in the end? For example, with our Amazon Accessibility Anthem, we wanted to raise awareness in that we have accessible products, that we prioritize accessibility. Perhaps you have a different marketing goal for your organization. Something as simple as social media engagement, more likes and comments on a post. And then related to that, what do you need to showcase in order to achieve those goals? Okay, so we're going to get into defining inclusive marketing core values. Now, I always feel a certain type of way because, you know, I'm kind of telling you, these should be your values, but the reality is that this type of work does come with a lot of responsibility. You are ensuring that certain content, that all content have a certain bar of accessibility, if not raising the bar on that. And you are ensuring that representation is authentic and intentional. So in doing all of this work, there inherently comes with certain values. So first and foremost is the nothing about us without us. And I mentioned that before, but we really take it to heart. And it doesn't matter if you've been in the space for 10 years or a day, it rings true no matter what. Always practice nothing about us without us. You never want to create content about someone, about a community, and not have them at the table. It's not going to come off well. It's probably going to come off performative, and you may get backlash. So really take that to heart, because not only is it the right thing to do, the most respectful thing to do, but it will make your work better. Always be authentic. So when we get into casting and casting inclusively, this is really important. So a big no-no, for example, is never casting a non-disabled person to play a person with a disability. And unfortunately, this is rampant within Hollywood. I'll just blame United States, United States. But it's unfortunately in mainstream media everywhere. We see people pretending that they need to use a wheelchair when they are not a wheelchair user, or pretending they are blind when they are not blind. That's just not right. We want to cast authentically. We want to communicate about these experiences authentically and respectfully. We do not want to perpetuate harmful tropes. And I'll go into 2 tropes, but there are several. And this is one area that I strongly encourage you to dive deeper. But a trope is basically a storyline or representation that does more harm than good. It's a common narrative that people tend to fall on, and it's actually misrepresenting the community. Another core value would be clear that disability isn't bad. So you can kind of pull this thread across your playbook in different ways, starting from the glossary into different parts of your playbook, but just calling out people with disabilities. Some people prefer disabled person. You know, regardless of their terminology preference, disability, the word or the condition, is not bad. It's part of the human life and how someone identifies. And just as someone may identify as woman and Hispanic, like I do, is someone can also identify as having a disability, and it doesn't mean anything negative. As I mentioned before, and it bears repeating, is elevate and prioritize the voice of disabled people. Just as we did with our accessibility anthem, really elevating Jesse's voice, you want to do the same in other parts of your campaign. Even still photography. I'll share some still photography that we shot last year in the late of the year. And even though these are models, we still ask them, like, hey, would this setup and the propping work in your life, or is this completely not working? You know, for example, is one person plays adaptive soccer, and you know, like, hey, is this soccer ball like the type of adaptive soccer ball you would use? Of course, prior to that, we had done our own research, we had consulted with people with disabilities, but finally, you know, as a respectful gut check and check-in with the talent is, you know, does this setup work for you? And then lastly, examine social roles of people with disabilities in your campaign. And we put this as core values because no matter if you're in public relations or production or social media, these types of things, these tenets ring true for everything. And the last one is examine social roles, which is particularly important because oftentimes we represent people with disabilities in a different hierarchy or social role or position of authority. So an example would be a parental figure. Oftentimes people create campaigns or stories and they showcase a person with a disability as the child and a non-disabled person as the parent. But in actuality, people with disabilities are parents and they're having children of their own. So just kind of examine those social roles and make sure that you're not perpetuating something that is not true. This is an opportunity to kind of nudge society forward, as we say. Teacher and student. A person with a disability can be a teacher. Actually, we just did a video for Echo Frames. These are smart glasses. And in that, we showcase a blind customer, and he talks about how he uses his Echo Frames because he is a teacher, and he can use voiceover connected to his Echo Frames and hear his voiceover screen reader, and his students will not hear it, and he's teaching a whole mathematics class. So positioning him as the teacher and not the student is a way to kind of nudge society forward, because society is very much sitting on those decades of marginalizations and negative tropes. So make sure you examine social roles as you get into this work. So let's get into storytelling and representation best practices. I've already been talking about it a little bit, but let's get into it a little bit more. So we recommend that storytelling and representation be authentic. So as I mentioned, never casting a non-disabled person to play a person with a disability, that it's balanced and affirmative. We don't want it to be showcasing as some type of like charity or sympathetic storyline. You know, this is an affirmative storyline. It's balanced, not negative or positive. As I'll showcase, like it could be a little humorous if done the right way. Focus on active roles rather than passive. This is another common mistake in marketing communications. When you finally have that disability representation, because it took so long to get there, then the person with a disability is in a passive role. They're kind of cast as a secondary character, and that doesn't empower the community. So really focus on the active roles rather than the passive. In this line of work, keep in mind that everything is inherently intersectional and diverse. Yes, we're talking about the disability community, but disability community encapsulates different races, ethnicities, gender, sexual orientation, religions, and so on and so forth. You know, the most common disability representation, and I'll have to pull the resource for you, but I think it's from a recent report from Institute of Public Relations, something like that, and Voya Financial. But they found out that the most common representation is a white man in a wheelchair, and you know that doesn't represent the entire community. The community is diverse, it's beautiful, it's different races, different ethnicities, and so on. So keep that in mind when you are figuring out your representation, if you're casting, if you're animating, and so on. We also want to make sure it's solution oriented. So, you know, when I think of this bullet point, I think about I used to work for UNICEF back in the day, and UNICEF is largely known as a charitable organization. But even at UNICEF, it wasn't about like, when we take photos and videos and produce content, it wasn't so much about the problem. Like, yes, there is a problem, depending on which area of the world they were focusing on. but what is the solution of it? Like, let's move forward and talk about the solution. Let's talk about empowerment and solution. Yes, you know, we are sitting on decades of marginalization, discrimination, ableism, inaccessible barriers, physical and digital, but rather than harping on that, let's try to figure out the solution and have people with disabilities in a more empowered state. This is, again, another opportunity to nudge society forward. And then lastly, be free of tropes. So easier said than done, but it will take a little bit of understanding what are tropes to begin with. So I'm going to go through 2 tropes. There are several. If you take anything away from this presentation as homework, please dive into tropes further, because when I started doing this work, it wasn't until I understood what are all the tropes that a light bulb clicked for me and I said, oh, this is what not to do. Now I can go do everything but that. So these are just 2 examples of tropes. One is inspiration porn, and I'm not like using a bad word or anything. This is the term that the community uses. It's widely known, but basically it means portraying people with disabilities as inspiration just because of their disability. And it's reducing them as objects of inspiration. And it really serves as content to make the non-disabled person feel good about themselves. So an example is what I have here on the screen. It's a young boy in a adaptive kind of sports wheelchair, and he has a basketball in his lap. And to the left of the photo, the words appear, "Your excuse is invalid." And it's trying to say, like, hey, if this kid can do it, why can't you? And it's the wrong message to send, because first of all, it's not centering the person with a disability. We're just talking about the boy. We're not really showcasing him. It's serving to be content for the non-disabled person. It's saying, like, hey, look at this, and like, why don't you do that yourself? It's inspiration porn because it's serving the non-disabled person rather than serving the person with a disability in a respectful way. So please keep an eye out on this. It's rampant within social media and elsewhere. The second trope I'll get into, which is related, a second. Excuse me, is emotional manipulation. So this is similar to inspiration porn, but this is a little bit more nuanced. So this is the concept that content featuring people with disabilities needs to be emotional or tear-jerking in order to be worth watching. So you see this a lot in movies, in news stories, that finally a movie or a story or a news article comes out about something related to disability, and whoa, it's something related to that's tear-jerking or emotional. A big example of that is in the United States, prom is very popular. It's something that happens in the United States during high school, and you know, every year, without a doubt, a story surfaces up that showcases a non-disabled person asking a person with a disability to prom. And, you know, it's intended to invoke the waterworks of tears and like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful act, what a beautiful gesture. And it's emotionally manipulating the audience, you know, at the because of the person with a disability. It's just highly disrespectful, and it's actually harmful to the disability community. It makes you, it's a type of content that takes you on an emotional journey where you first feel sad or you're concerned, and then you're relieved because of the solution. So like, oh, this person with a disability could not go to prom, and then all of a sudden they've been asked to prom, and wow, what a story. And it's actually BS. So please stay clear from emotional manipulation. A big culprit of this, actually, one pro tip is the music. So it's kind of, things to watch out for in every step of the way. But even if you have intentional casting, intentional pre-production, on set, yada, 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 and then you get to post-production and you're in editing, and then the editor layers in the music, and then this has happened a couple times for me, actually. And I said, wait a minute. How come the music starts so sad when we're talking about the person with a disability? And then when something else happens, the solution magically appears, the music turns to be uplifting and glorious. Like, wait a minute, that's not right. We are emotionally manipulating the audience through music. So just something else to keep in mind, that these kind of tropes can manifest in different parts of the production cycle. Okay, let's get into production best practices. So before you create pre-production, this could be an entire entire session by itself, and it's just on one slide. So encourage diverse casting. Actually, Amazon Studios has, I think, an inclusive casting guideline, so you may be able to pull from. But encourage your casting agency, or if you're casting yourself, just keep in mind, like, hey, let's have a talent pool that represents our customer base, which includes people with disabilities. Make sure in the pre-production stage that you are thinking about accessible situations and accessible sets. So in a large scale production, maybe you are filming outside, and what if you cast someone who is neurodivergent? Is there a more quiet space that you can offer folks? And it doesn't even apply, it doesn't even have to be specifically for neurodivergent casting, and it could be applicable to anybody. But how can we make it a more accessible and inclusive set? This also includes, for example, when we cast Jessie in the accessibility anthem, making sure that her script, when she was in the studio voice recording, that her script was also printed out in Braille. So thinking through these different facets in pre-production will help, set the tone for a more smoother journey afterwards. Also think about accessibility in advance. So as you're producing a video, are you also making an audio described video? If so, make sure you've got that going in advance. There's a whole set of considerations when you get into audio described videos, and those considerations should be known in the pre-production stage. In pre-production, you also want to think about light sensitivity, cognitive disabilities, and so on. If you're producing a video, and perhaps outline these accessibility guidelines in advance, like, hey, we don't want flashing lights. We know that is an accessibility blocker, frankly. It could cause epileptic seizures for a customer. So let's really stray away from that. I work in tech, and sometimes I have to, dial up, our teams want to be like flashy and animations and lights. And it's like, hey, let's dim the lights, literally. Let's make sure we are okay with the light sensitivity front. And also thinking about cognitive disabilities. How is the pace of your video? Is the voiceover going too fast? Is the script using words that are very advanced? Take into consideration all of these things in the pre-production phase, so that as you get into on-set and post-production, you already know what you're doing. It's already kind of built on that strong backbone. Pre-production continued, making sure your creative partners are committed to accessibility. One best practice that we do at Amazon, especially if we have someone with a disability going on set, is meeting with the set crew in advance and say like, okay, we're gonna have someone with a disability on set. This is their disability, you know, this is who they are. These are the considerations, like disability etiquette. Disability etiquette is, not everybody knows disability etiquette. So making sure that you level set everybody's understanding and saying things like, hey, if someone has a motorized scooter, do not touch the scooter. That is their property, you know, do not touch it, do not move it, etc. If someone's blind, do not just, you know, grab their arm and direct them to a different area of the set. So, you know, these little things that you may be working in this space for quite a while, but again, the advocacy and the educating and informing stakeholders very much continuous throughout this process, even for pre-production. So making sure that both your crew and your talent can easily access the premise and communicate. Keep in mind that, again, people with disabilities everywhere, every one of us connected, people in your crew may have disabilities themselves, and they may not have self-disclosed that. So regardless if you know it or not, making sure you have easily accessible premises, like here's how you enter the place, here's how you exit, here are where the restrooms are, and so on. And then finally, have I consulted with the talent or agency to see if someone needs a reasonable accommodation? So when we think about reasonable accommodations, sometimes we just think about employment and workspace. But when you get to a film shoot or a photo shoot or whatever it may be, also think about how can you offer a reasonable accommodation and institute a mechanism so that everybody feels comfortable in requesting something that they may need to work at their best ability. So then when you're on set, again, provide disability etiquette training and refresher. Even thinking about framing and composition. This is a fun little story. So on set, camera direction. If imagine you are filming someone who is a little person or a person of short stature, the camera director, the director, or the camera person may not know, like, hey, you can't have your camera the same height and angle as an average height person. You have to adjust it to be an equitable kind of angle as everybody else. So these little things, it may seem not important, but it actually helps promote equality. You don't want to have a camera angle from the top shooting down for someone of short stature. It just doesn't promote an equitable position. And then also create a safe and trusting environment to allow for disabled talent to feel empowered to call things out that are inauthentic. Again, earning that trust, talking with them beforehand, explaining what is the set, what's going to happen, and always allowing space and time for someone to call out like, hey, this actually doesn't work for me, and so on and so forth. After you've created in post-production, examine your music and video voiceover and your video accessibility. So in terms of music and voiceover, make sure that the music levels are adjusted. It's not going to negatively reinforce any anxiety or PTSD. Watch out for the tropes caused by music or voiceover. As I mentioned, the emotional manipulation. Use plain language and descripted voiceover. If you may have noticed in the Amazon Accessibility Anthem, I played both an audio described version and a caption version. The caption had also captioned the audio description, so different layers to it. Video accessibility captions, those are different from subtitles. Again, this could be an entirely session on its own. Audio description and transcripts. Transcripts are huge sometimes people don't want to watch a video. They just want to skim through the content. I know me personally, I can't sit through a podcast. I know people love podcasts. I'm not one of them. So just have the transcript there, because whether someone identifies as neurodivergent, as something else, as dyslexic, as deaf, hard of hearing, transcripts are always good to have. So let's get into examples, and I'm going to kind of breeze through this fairly quickly so we can leave time for Q&A. This is a very, very quick, I think 15-second spot. I'm going to go ahead and play it.
Man in a wheelchair.
Alexa, open the blinds.
Opening the blinds.
Outside, a window washer gives a smiling nod. They exchange a friendly, awkward look.
Alexa, close the blinds.
Control your home with your voice. Amazon.com/accessibility.
All right, so again, integrating our brand traits of being peculiar, of having humor, but humor not at the expense of the person with the disability. The person with the disability is centered in the story. It's the product is not the hero, the Amazon Echo. The hero of the story is actually the main character, the talent in the wheelchair. So I love that little spot. Sorry. This is non-scripted. I don't know if we have time to watch this or not. I'll go ahead and play it. I'll be a rebel here.
The first time I was able to control a device with my voice, it was that wow factor of, oh my God, I'm doing this on my own. My name is Josh, and I live with my fiance, Katie, and my 2 kids, Fable and Calder. I am a trial attorney, and I run a nonprofit. And this is the story of how Alexa helps me live more independently. Alexa, turn on platform up. I'm able to have Alexa control different devices. So with my wheelchair platform lip, Alexa, turn on elevator first floor. My elevator buttons. Alexa, turn on all office lights. I even have a camera for podcasting. Alexa, call Fable Echo. With Alexa and my family, we're always able to communicate.
Hi, Daddy.
What's going on?
Your necklace that has a D in it. Do you want to come to the dance party?
I'm always trying to find ways to break down barriers in the accessibility community and show the different ways I'm controlling my environment. And the more and more we share these type of stories, the more that we can know what's possible.
All right, so that is a non-scripted example. Before, when I shared Alexa Open the Blinds, that was a scripted. So we had a storyboard, scripted, cast a talent, that was an actor. This is not an actor. This is a real customer, a real person. This is non-scripted. So still, the traits of authenticity, intentionality still rings true no matter if it's scripted or not scripted. Same goes with the accessibility of the videos.
The first.
And then I'll get into still photography. So we recently shot still photography for Amazon. This is kind of a compilation, and here are individual photos. A person in a motorized chair with their service dog, and they have Amazon Echo Hub behind them. Again, centering the person with the disability in the photo. She is the hero, not the device. We are not saving anybody. It's people. We are highlighting people. This talent actually plays soccer, and so we integrated the propping that is authentic to her life. So we put an adaptive soccer ball. And again, as I mentioned, having that earned trust with the talent to be like, hey, we bought this ball as part of the propping. Is this, would you actually use this? And for them to say yes or no. This is a photo of a burn survivor doing yoga, and they have an Echo Pop on the stand. This is the first time we've ever cast a burn survivor, and I don't think that there's many mass media creatives out there showcasing burn survivors. So we were excited to do this, this part of disability representation. This is a child. She has cerebral palsy and uses crutches, walkers. She's using a Fire tablet. So just having them set up as she would have them in her everyday life. They would not be lying on the floor or against or far away from her. They would be within arm's distance. This woman, she identifies as being autistic, and you may wonder, how do you take a photo and authentically showcase someone with a non-apparent disability? We try to put in propping that's like, if you know, you know. On the stand next to her is a coffee mug that says Neuro Spicy. And there's also a book that says Untypical, which is very popular in the neurodivergent community. And there's an Echo Show 5 on her stand. It's a man with a missing limb, missing hand, and he's reading, I think it's a Kindle, yes. And that is it. Let me just breeze through the recap. As I mentioned, keep nothing about us without us in mind. Know your customer and your brand. Have your guidelines together. Keep things authentic. Prioritize disabled voices. Honor intersectionality, and create society nudging content. All right, easier said than done. And then here are some resources that we really like to refer to. Language Style Guide from National Center on Disability and Journalism in the United States. The Amazon Studios Inclusion Playbook is great. Critical Access has a list of tropes that are really great. And then there's another Center for Scholars and Storytellers on disability representation. And that is it. I think we have time for a couple questions.
Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, what a fascinating talk. I mean, yeah, so much valuable information in there. Yeah, I loved hearing about your kind of core values, you know, especially the kind of nothing about us without us. I think that really resonated. I think if anyone does have any questions, we've probably got time for one or two. I think we got a couple here. So this first question, Elaine, has been submitted anonymously, and it's asking, can you explain the language of non-apparent disability? I really like this as opposed to hidden or invisible disability.
Yeah, great question. So there's actually a blog post from an organization called Disability In. So if you go to disabilityin.org, within their blog, they've outlined different reasons why you would use hidden versus invisible versus non-apparent. So in a very tight nutshell, when you use the word hidden disability, it may insinuate that the person is ashamed of their disability, and that may not be the case, and that's not something we want to perpetuate, being ashamed of your disability. So hidden is not really used. Invisible, some disabilities may be non-apparent for some time and then appear later on. So invisible may not ring true always. So non-apparent seems to be kind of more commonly used.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think finally, it'd be great to know, just going back to kind of your kind of video accessibility and marketing, kind of, we've got captions, we'll kind of know about kind of captions, audio descriptions, but like if you've got any kind of pro tips on kind of how we can raise that bar even more.
Yeah, as I mentioned, think beforehand if you're going to make an audio described version of your video. When you're doing audio description, you're going to layer in another voiceover track, audio track into your video. And if you think about it, if you have B-roll background sounds and plus voiceover script or someone talking on screen and it's wall-to-wall audio, then you may not have spaces to put in audio description. So if you think about it in advance, hey, we're going to produce an audio described version, you may want to have a different version of your video that has, it's a little bit longer, but has more spaces to breathe where you could insert parts of the audio description. So that may require inserting more B-roll.
Amazing. Thank you so much. No, that was such a fascinating presentation. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to everyone that joined us. We have one more talk today coming up in an hour. We have Natalie Patrice Tucker joining us from the States again. There is still time to sign up. Head on over to our Eventbrite page If you haven't signed up yet, you can sign up for this afternoon's session and tomorrow's too. Elaine, thanks again. That was fantastic. And yeah, we will be sending out the recording as soon as it's ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.